Hi, boys and girls. We are going to continue to read the report card by Andrew Clements. Today we will be reading chapters 17 and 18. We'll start with chapter 17. Chapter 17 is titled Hard Test. So, as I read today, and I want you to follow along, I want you to be thinking about the following questions. So, number one, what was Nora's hardest test? And as you think about this test might not be something that she's taking on paper. This might not be like a written test. This might be something that's happening within herself as a person. So think about that. And number two, Mrs. Hankney tells Nora, quote, a gift like yours comes with responsibilities. What responsibilities do you think come with Nora's gift? All right, let's get to reading. Chapter 17, Hard Test. Friday's important events went perfectly. Stephen and I were all set for the next step on Monday or Tuesday. But once again, I learned that things don't always happen according to plan because Friday after school, as I sat in the library doing my outside reading, Mrs. Hankney came marching up to my table and said, Nora, please follow me. The principal turned around and marched out of the media center, across the hall, and into her office. I barely had time to glance at Stephen, and he gave me a quick thumbs up as I hurried after Mrs. Hankney. We hadn't thought this part of our plan would begin until after the weekend. Mrs. Hankney stood behind her desk and said, Please sit down, Nora. When I was in the chair across from her, she held up 3 pieces of paper and said, I want to know something, and I want to know it right now. This is your spelling test from this morning, and you got a 0 on it. This is your math test from 4th period, and you got a 0. And this is your science test from 2 hours ago. Another 0. 3 tests, and you got a 0 on each one. I want to know the meaning of this. We all know you are a brilliant child, Nora, and the only possible conclusion is that you have gotten 3 zeros on purpose. And I demand to know why. Right now. Out with it. Why did you get these zeros? I had told Stephen I would be brave when our plan started to heat things up, and now I was having my hardest test of the day. The angry grown up shaking papers in my face test. Mrs. Hankney repeated the question. Why did you get zeros on these tests? I had been rehearsing my answer to that one. I said, I got zeros because I got all the answers wrong. Mrs. Hankney's face bunched up until her eyes were little slits below her eyebrows. Then she found her voice, and it wasn't pretty. Don't you dare be smart with me, young lady. Why did you deliberately get every question wrong on these tests? Tell me. I looked her right in the eye and said, Because all 3 of these tests are nothing but simple memorization, same as almost all the other tests we take. So I decided to express my opinion about these kind of testing. These tests each got the score they deserved, 0. This was the tricky moment. Because if Mrs. Hankney just kept getting madder and madder, I could get suspended or even expelled from school. I was hoping something else would happen. And it did. Because Mrs. Hankney wasn't just a shouter, and she wasn't just some lady with an office. She was mad, but she was still a teacher, the top teacher of the whole school. She was in charge of the learning program for every grade, and I had just thrown down a challenge. Mrs. Hankney glared at me for another few seconds, and then she sat down in her chair and began to look at the test. About a minute later, in a much calmer voice, she said, I see what you mean. And it's true that these tests all require students to memorize a lot of information, but knowing basic information is important. It's like the foundation. You get bored with this kind of test because you've been trying to pretend you're average and you're not. This kind of test is fine for most of the kids. You need to be in a gifted program, Nora. In the gifted program, you'd have lots of creative challenges. That's what you need. I've already talked with your mother, and I have recommended that you start this program as soon as possible. Maybe you should even skip ahead into sixth grade or even eighth. I could tell Mrs. Hankney liked that skipping grades idea. Even skipping to sixth grade would move me right out of her school. It was the instant solution. No more Nora. But I shook my head. What about all the other kids? I get to go and do creative and exciting things, and all the other kids get worksheets and memorization and the same old stuff week after week. It's not fair. Mrs. Hankney was still the principal, and she wasn't going to sit around and argue with a fifth grader. So she stood up and said, "You may go back to the library now. I'm sorry I lost my temper, but you have upset all your teachers. A gift like yours comes with responsibilities, Nora. I want you to think about that. You have responsibilities. You may go now, but this matter is not over." As I walked back into the library, I obeyed Mrs. Hankney. I thought about what she had just said, how a gift like mine comes with responsibilities. Mrs. Hankney was absolutely right. I did have responsibilities, except she and I had different ideas about what those responsibilities were. And Mrs. Hackney was absolutely right about something else, too. This matter was not over. Uh-oh. All right, guys, moving on to chapter 18. Chapter 18 is entitled Logic. So as I read and you follow along, I want you to be thinking, what is Nora worried about in chapter 18? Number 2, if Stephen and Nora implement, that means put into place, the next step of the plan, what do you think the teachers will do? And number 3, Nora agrees that all things happen for a reason. Do you believe this? Do you think all things happen for a reason? Explain your answer to me when you're done. All right, chapter 18, Logic. When I got back to my table in the library, Stephen pounced on me. "What happened? What'd she say? Are you in trouble?" Not too much," I said, "but she got pretty mad and she wants to put me in a gifted program right away." "What else?" he asked. "What about the test and everything?" I shook my head. "I'll tell you all about it on the bus, okay? I need to finish this reading." That wasn't exactly true. What I really needed was time to think, because I could see where all this was going, but I couldn't tell where it would end. The plan Stephen and I had made had sounded good when we were talking about it, and it had been kind of fun to be a show off genius one day and then get 3 zeros the next. But something Mrs. Hackney had said really got me. She'd said, "You have upset all your teachers." And that got me thinking. If they were all upset now, how were they going to feel if we really got the school stirred up? Because that was probably going to happen. Our plan was to get as many kids as we could to start getting zeros. Tests, quizzes, homework, zeros on everything. I was just the leader, the test case. Stephen was pretty sure that Lee, Ben, Kevin, and James would go along, and he thought he could sell the idea to his little brother and some of his friends in fourth grade, too. I thought if I explained everything just right, a bunch of the girls would join in, and that would get a whole gang of parents involved because all of the parents were worried about grades all the time. I mean, most of our parents were already worrying about which colleges we would get into. So if a lot of kids started getting zeros on everything, it would be a big deal. The story would probably get into the newspaper and then get onto local TV for sure because all the school meetings were broadcast on cable. So pretty soon the whole town would know about all the bad grades. But Stephen and I weren't planning to stop with zeros on some tests and quizzes. Because once people started paying attention, we were going to tell everyone that we wanted all the kids in Philbrook to get zeros on the mastery test, too. If all the schools in Philbrook suddenly got rotten scores on the CMT, that would be major news because if the schools got bad CMT scores, then the whole town gets a bad reputation. My mom's realtor, and I've heard her say that if a town gets bad scores, then fewer people want to buy houses there. bad scores mean that the principals and the teachers get in trouble. And then the State Board of Education gets involved, and on and on and on. Because those CMT scores are a huge deal. And since the kids are the ones who actually sit down and take the test, the kids control the scores. That meant that the kids had all this power that they didn't even know about. Stephen and I were ready to challenge all of that. It was going to be like when all the teachers organized a strike and stopped working until they got paid more money. We were going to organize a kids' strike, a strike against grades and tests and pressure and bad competition. As I sat there thinking, I could see it all happening step by step. In 3 or 4 weeks, our whole school would be turned upside down. Kids would be getting zeros on tests. Teachers would be mad at the kids. Parents would be mad at their kids and the teachers and the principal. And the school board would be mad at everybody. And they would all be mad at me and at Stephen. So that's why I needed to stop now and think. I looked around the library. At the next table, Melanie Neeson was reading a teen romance book. She wasn't worried about her grades. She was wondering whether Roger would ever ask Susan to the big dance. Behind me, 2 fourth-grade boys were arguing about the best way to display their project at the science fair. They were laughing and goofing around, and they were learning too, but they didn't even know it, and they weren't competing or thinking about grades. Over in the corner near the magazine rack, 3 girls were flopped on beanbag chairs and with their heads close together, giggling about something. School was a fun place for them. Any pressure? Not today. At the other end of the table, Stephen was chewing on the end of his pencil and making faces at his math homework. Was Stephen desperately unhappy about school? No. Did he actually believe he was dumb, like permanently stupid? No. And why had Stephen gotten involved with a crazy plan that might shake up the whole town of Philbrook? Did he do it because he had a deep desire to change education in the state of Connecticut? No, he did it for me. Plus, it sounded like an adventure with a little danger and excitement. Next fall, when it was time for all the teachers to get the kids cranked up for the CMT again, would all the kids get stressed out for a month or so? Yes, absolutely. But then the testing would be over and all the kids would get on with their lives. They would laugh and talk to their friends. They would do their homework. Their teachers would teach them. They would take their tests and quizzes. And the time would go by. Then they would move on to the next grade, and the next, and the next. Fact. I was the only kid in the whole school worrying this way about grades and tests and competition. All the other kids were being normal, and I had to face that fact too. I was not a normal kid. I had a gift. That's what Mrs. Hackney had called it. Some gift. I got up and started walking toward the circulation desk. Mrs. Burns saw me coming, and she didn't look too happy about it, but I needed to talk. I said, "Hi, Mrs. Byrne." Mrs. Byrne smiled. "Hello, Nora. You look a little down. Hard day?" I nodded and said, "Yeah, did you hear anything?" "Oh, yes, it was the headline news. Star student bombs 3 tests. Pretty dramatic." She looked into my face and said, "Is everything working out the way you wanted it to?" I don't know. And I felt like such a baby because I could feel tears at the corner of my eyes. Mrs. Byrne pretended not to notice. She looked down at her keyboard and then at the screen in front of her. She said, "I've been wondering about something, Nora. I hope you don't think I'm being nosy, but I'm very curious. It's a simple question. Why do you think you're so smart?" I took a swipe at my eyes and gave a shrug. Genetics, I guess. That's what they say if you get a supercharged bright mind. Mrs. Burns shook her head. I don't mean where did the intelligence come from. I mean, why do you think you have it? She paused a second, and then she said, "Think of it this way. Do you believe that things happen for a reason?" I said, "Yes, at least I think that's true." Mrs. Burns said, "So if things do happen for a reason, then there must be a reason that you've been given so much intelligence, right? I nodded, and she said, So that's what I'm asking. Why do you think you're so smart? I've always felt like I could understand things instantly. Whenever a question came along, all I had to do was think, and zip, an answer was right there. No busy signal, no waiting. This question was different. I was thinking hard, but I got nothing. I said, I don't know. I have no idea why I'm this smart. And if I don't know the answer, then maybe I'm not as bright as I think I am. Is that it? Is that what you mean? Mrs. Burns smiled again and shook her head. I'm not saying that. I think you're every bit as intelligent as the evidence suggests, and then some. It's just that I've met all kinds of kids with all sorts of amazing talents. And for me, the big question has always been why? And then, usually much later, I begin to learn the answer. I get to see what they do with their lives. It's interesting, don't you think? I nodded. Mrs. Burns said, So tell me what comes next for you, Nora. You certainly have gotten everyone's attention. What's next? Yesterday, I would have been able to answer that question. I've said, just you wait. Stephen and me, we've got big plans. Watch out for lots of action and all sorts of fireworks and plenty of loud noises. But I didn't feel that way anymore. So I said, I'm not sure. There are too many variables. Everything's kind of weird now. Mrs. Burns said. I wish I could tell you what to do, Nora, but I can't. I can tell you this, though. Of all the possible things we can do at any moment, one is usually better than the rest. So that's the one to look out for. All you ever have to do is the next good thing. Make sense? I smiled and said, Very logical. Sounds like something a librarian would say. That got a laugh out of her. Mrs. Burns said, Well, I think it's true all the same. I know you can figure this out, and I'll be watching to see how you do. I said, That'll make two of us, plus every other kid and teacher in the school. The speaker below the clock let out a long bell tone. I said, See you Monday, Mrs. Byrne. And she said, Have a nice weekend, Nora. I went back to my table and got my things ready for the bus ride home. Mrs. Byrne hadn't given me any answers, and she hadn't solved any of my problems. In fact, now I had more questions than before. I'd talked to her. Even so, I feel better, which wasn't logical, because the fact is, logic only works up to a certain point. Beyond that point, it takes a different kind of thinking, more like listening and watching. That was what I needed to do. I needed to listen and watch. I needed to be on the lookout for the next good thing. And if I spotted the next good thing, then would come the hard part, because then I'd have to do it. All right, boys and girls, that is the end of chapter 18. Go back into your document and answer your questions. Time to you guys.